Hello everyone, I'm just going to demo this rendering engine that I've been working on. So for the last 3 or 4 weeks I've been learning C++ and OpenGL to try and build this rendering engine, and this is the result that I've got. So what you see is this is just a scene that I've created in Blender and loaded it into the rendering engine, and I'll try and demo this. So the rendering engine is it's a physically based renderer. What that is a higher quality representation of how objects look in the real world. So the way it works is you start with the mesh and its base color, and then for each point on the surface you describe how metallic and how rough that point is. So if we zoom in here, you can see the more metallic parts reflect light very strongly and sharply versus the rough, versus the non-metallic rust part. And the roughness also describes how sharp that light hits your eye. So here is quite shiny versus the tabletop, which is not as shiny. You can see that here. I also have normal mapping, so you can see this object on the right. It's the same mesh as the other two, except it looks like it has way more contours. And this is because the normal map describes how the light bounces off in a different direction. So you can use that to give an object way more detail than it would have otherwise, rendering so many triangles. You can see on the tabletop, this is a flat plane, but it looks like it has grooves in, and it bounces light in different ways, and that's because of the normal map as well. You can see that there. So what I don't have are any shadows right now. You can see there's no shadows on the table or the floor or anything. I might add that later. I also don't have anti-aliasing, so you can see it looks kind of jagged here. Yeah, I might add that later as well. I just haven't got around to that. What I do have is HDR lighting, and what that means is high dynamic range. So sometimes when you render a scene, you might have some very dark areas and some very bright areas, and it might be very difficult to render all that onto a screen, onto a monitor that doesn't have that kind of dynamic range. So this is a technique. Basically, you render out to a floating point buffer, and that gives you the whole range of the floating point numbers to be able to work with. And then after the whole scene is rendered, then you use what's called a tone mapper to reduce that range down into what will fit into your monitor. And with HDR lighting, you can also have bloom. So I added this bloom here. If I turn it up, you can see it gives a slight light halo around some of the really, really bright areas. If you look at this really bright part, you can see the light spill over the edge of the silhouette. This is done using a technique from Unreal Engine, and what they do is they separate out first the bright parts of the image into its own frame buffer, and then continuously blur, horizontal blur and then vertical blur. You keep blurring until there's barely anything left. And then you add all that on to the final image, and you get that nice effect. Sometimes there's some slight artifacts here, looking very square. Some of the really small areas that reflect. So maybe it doesn't look that good right now. I need to work on that, I think. If I go over here, you can see this these computer screens, and these are made. This is just the GUI library outputting to a frame buffer texture, and then added to the mesh. By the way, this camera movement I coded is like a rollerball. It's like a rollerball, so you can move it around as if there was a mouse ball here. It has momentum as well, so move it around like this. And then if we press tab, we go into first person mode, and this is how the game would look. Just move around. So we can also go to the mesh tab. If we look at this, this shows you all the meshes in the scene. We can see what material this mesh has, and we can actually look at the diffuse texture, the normal texture, and the specular map. So this has metallic and roughness in one texture. and again for the other object. We're going to also use this gizmo here to move the objects around. Really basic stuff. So over on the right we have some debug options for the shader. So we can choose different options. For example, normal map. This gives us just the normal map of each mesh. We can override the albedo texture to be checkerboard. Diffuse texture is without any shading, and no diffuse texture is just the shading, without any color data. Metallic map, and roughness map. Using these are mapped to RGB values. So how does it work? In the code, we can see we use some macro magic to basically test. Have we clicked on this option? If yes, override what the value would be and just return whoever's shorthand for metallic and roughness. These macros are very simple. What we do is just test debug line, which is a uniform, against the line number. We discard name, but we do some preprocessor magic to load the options list into the GUI. What's really cool about this is that the whole shader is hot reloaded, so I can make some changes. Let's put testing, and we can choose different values to output to the screen only if that option is selected. So let's, for example, put red. Oops. And now when I press save, a new option has been hot reloaded. So if I click testing, now we get that red color. This gives a really nice way of testing different values out, making changes, making sure things work without actually breaking your existing code, and just putting it as a debug option. And you only have to write one line. Really cool. On the next tab we have lights. So here we can actually see where this light source is. We can move this around. Everything responds dynamically. You can choose how bright it is. You can change the colors. And we also have multiple lights. So yeah, color picker, pretty cool. So what else I can show you is the entire game engine is hot reloadable. So if I tab over to here, let's just make a change to the GUI, GUI button hot reloading. So I can compile this. It takes a few seconds, but without closing the game, everything is reloaded, and if you tab back into here, this new button has appeared. So everything in the whole game can be hot reloaded. The state isn't fully hot reloaded yet. It shouldn't be too hard to do. Sometimes it is nice to reset all the state anyway. But at least you don't have to close the window. You don't have to load all the textures again, all the models again. So I think it's really quite nice.